Welcome to The Path Forward, Mental Health with Maps. I'm Dr. Gina Pasquale, and I'm so glad you're joining us. This podcast was born from a simple but powerful idea, the reality that our mental health cannot be separated from our daily lived experiences. Today, I am pleased to welcome Elijah de Castro to our table. Elijah is the Health Solutions Reporter for the Keene Sentinel. In today's episode, we explore how unexpected experiences influence how we see the world and the choices we make. We explore how factors beyond our control impact our lived experiences. So let's begin. So welcome, Elijah.
Thank you for having me.
So we start each episode with what we call the compass check, just something that gets us into this room out of our busy lives. And so what I'd like us to do, and this is for our listeners as well, is there's a type of check-in that we call a pies check-in. So this will be more rhetorical. You can just answer it within your own mind, and we'll ask our listeners to kind of do the same.
Sure.
So a PIES check-in stands for physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. Okay. So I'm going to walk us through that. So first, just take a moment to check in with yourself about how you're physically doing today. So how you're feeling physically. Did you have enough energy for the things you wanted to do today? Have you been sleeping? How'd you sleep last night? How's your appetite? Any pain experiences in the body today? And then the next one, then bring your mind to checking in with how you've been doing intellectually today. And so that's kind of thinking about what was your mind on today? Was there a thought or a question or an idea that your brain just kept returning to over and over? Was there something you were curious about today? Did you feel bored today? So just checking in about that. And then the next one is emotionally. So what emotions were riding closest to the surface today? Did you have space in your life to feel anything you were emotionally feeling today? Were there any emotions that surprised you in this day? And then finally, check in with yourself about where you're doing spiritually or socially. So what today gave you a sense of connection or meaning? Or was there an absence of connection and meaning in your day? Where did you feel most like yourself today? And was there anything you paused for, just even a brief moment, something that kind of was a moment of awe or took you by surprise and made you feel connected? So that's our check-in. So
that was surprisingly brought me back into my head a little bit.
Yeah, and that's the goal, is we want to kind of get ourselves out of, whenever we do any kind of grounding or mindfulness, or just check in to see how we're doing on a mental health level. We want to try to tackle all areas of our experience because it's all also very interwoven. I had an experience today. I was out for a walk and I went on a different route than I usually go, which is kind of a mindfulness strategy to take a different path. And I came around the corner where there's this little pond, and it was super quiet. But as I was coming around the corner in this little alcove with all of these lily pads, there was an entire flock of Canada geese in the water.
Special. Yeah.
Yeah, and just sort of peacefully sitting there. And for me, it was one of those moments of awe.
Yeah, I had something like that this morning. I biked to work, and so
cool.
I was I spent last night kind of overheated because my apartment just doesn't cool down very much, and so in the morning when I was biking to work, the cool breeze swept over me, and it was just kind of one of those moments of clarity you have in the middle of sort of an intense day, or where you're not really paying attention to everything in the present. Exactly.
Absolutely. And that's a good example of, too, how the physical body helps us to access those experiences. Those sensory experiences are a pathway into managing our emotional landscape.
Sure.
So you and I have already had a small conversation to talk about what we might talk about today.
Yes.
And I invited you here because of the beautiful reporting that you do for the Keene Sentinel, and
thank you. That's good. That's a good phrase.
Yeah. And you are a champion for mental health, and I always want to hear a little bit more of what you're noticing in the world and things that are going on for you. And so through our conversation, we talked about some things that shaped you and made you walk the path you're walking on.
That's right.
And so, yeah, could you take us back in your life? How did you become a journalist? What were the things that shaped you in the first place?
Sure. Yeah, well, I actually became a journalist a little bit kind of later on than I expected in my life. I went to communication school and I changed my major from film to journalism, like right around my junior year. Part of the reason for that was because I had my own kind of issues with film as kind of a career. There weren't many options there, but I always felt that the best way to connect with other people was, especially around serious topics like, in my case now, mental health, is through having conversations like these, having kind of like, intelligent, I guess, adult conversations. And I think in college, I felt like that was really lacking amongst, you can't really expect that from a bunch of 18-year-olds, but I kind of grew sick of the culture of the film program. And then eventually when I changed into journalism, it felt like there was more of a kind of an urgency to report on these issues that often go unaddressed. And I didn't know at the time that health would become my beat, but it just kind of, ever since I left college, it's just kind of like changed from climate reporting to I did war reporting at a certain point, and it all just kind of like led me towards where I am now. My journey post-college, which is just 2 years at this point, still 23, so I kind of have to like stay humble to how young I actually am. But my journey as a post-journalism school student of reporting has been one where I often interact with people's health, where I'm in communities where health is unfortunately on the decline. I think both in terms of physical health, but also mental health. I think, I'm sure you, being someone who works in mental health, understands that, as Americans, I think our mental health is something that doesn't go addressed nearly as much as it should. And we don't really have the resources in our communities to deal with that in a way that is productive and have conversations that, where everyone feels included in a way that's just kind of not, in a way that's not as sort of like politicized as we've kind of grown used to, I think, over the past 10 years. So that's where I'm at now with, here in the Monadnock region. I want to tell the stories of people interacting with the healthcare system. There's obviously big changes going on as we speak, but that's kind of where I'm at this point in my I guess I could call it a career, but I prefer to see it as kind of a role to this community and to the people who are here whose stories need to be told.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really important role to play. When in your life did you first start to develop an awareness that pieces of our healthcare system impact human beings, and it's not just all unicorns and rainbows? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had an experience that I was telling you about in preparation for this when I was younger in my life. I was in like sixth grade at the time, and
so like 11, 12-ish.
I think I can't remember exactly. It was 2013, so I was turning 12 that year. So it happened when I was 11, and my dad basically had a pretty serious stroke that affected him in a number of different ways and still affects him to this day. And having a stroke is something where it's like, it's not just something that affects the person who experiences it and the people around them, but it carries on for so long into someone's life. It changes your life forever because it's not really something that you can bounce back from and fully recover. It's an injury that just kind of affects you forever. And in my dad's case, he was fortunate to recover most of his, his ability to move around. He started playing piano a lot, and that helped him recover. It was his right side that was affected the most, but he still had, language issues was something that he had struggled with in the years after that.
And I imagine that wasn't an overnight thing. Being able to get back to playing piano or anything he did recover wouldn't have happened very very quickly.
Yeah, he actually had relapses about 6 or 7 months later. He had a series of they called them episodes, so they were kind of like, I don't know if they were mini strokes or seizures or what, but at the time when I was that young, it was I had experienced my dad for about almost 12 years. Mm-hmm. I had grown used to him as this kind of figure in my life who was, stabilizing and such. And he's a great dad. I love him to death. He's a great person. And I've been grateful to have really wonderful experiences with him, both before that and after that. But that experience for me was one where it felt like the world was not rooting for my family, because we went into the hospital, into the system, and the bill was it's so big that I don't even remember the actual number, but it was it was in the tens of thousands of dollars, and it immediately became, at a time of incredible stress, right? Like this figure within our family had this really adverse experience that was going to take years to recover from. And at a time when we were spread thin, we had, it wasn't, the hospital didn't make the decision to give him that enormous bill, but it felt like the whole healthcare system was not on our side. And that was kind of a moment that I come back to all these years later as kind of like a reminder to myself of, there's people here in Keene, in the Monadnock region, who have these experiences. God forbid it's a stroke, but you could get in a car crash and you end up in the hospital, and then you end up fighting an insurance claim for some horrible amount of money that you can't afford. And I think that experience taught me that health is something that should not be for sale. It's not something that you should have to, even though it's very expensive to deliver healthcare, it's not something that you should have to be concerned about ruining your life if something bad were to happen. And when that happened to me at that young age, it was kind of like it instilled in me this kind of, there is this huge injustice in the American system and the way that we run things here and the way we allow things to unfold for patients. And so that kind of stuck with me over the years and still influences. It's still kind of why, when I really ask myself, why am I doing this? Part of the reason was that experience, because it taught me how unjust our system is and how patients deserve, every opportunity to get back to a regular place. And I think that most people can relate to that in some level. Hopefully it's not that kind of experience, but we've all been in times where we need the healthcare system. We need it to work for us, and it's really failed us.
So I'm going to offer an observation.
Sure.
Because this is what psychologists do. I'm very, very moved by your story, and something that percolated in my mind as you were talking and taking us through that is, I am very interested in the study of resiliency. I am interested in when the chips are down, what makes a particular human move through that experience, grow through that experience, and harness something versus it pulling you down. And right now we know we have a mental health crisis with our teenagers in this country. So there you were, a tween, preteen, heading into your teenage years while this was happening in your family system. And you emerged from that into your emerging adulthood years with a sense of, all right, I have something I'm going to do in this world. Whether you move into other types of reporting or, continue with the health reporting, you have a sense of when you see something unjust, you want to do something about it.
Right.
How did that form? How did that happen? What were the factors in your life that helped you recognize moments of injustice and then shape it rather than it pulling you down into a depression?
Right, yeah. Well, I will say that I owe a lot of credit to my mom for that. She's a climate scientist and a climate activist, and so she's always been very, motivated by that, and that's been a consistent presence around me ever since I was young. And I actually remember at the time she was working in New York. So this was 2013. So this was back when New York was, they were on the verge of starting this controversial drilling technique called fracking. And I'm sure most people, they don't do it here in New Hampshire, but it has all these environmental risks. And at the time, my mom was working on an anti-fracking campaign to try and get the state of New York to ban fracking. And that was at the time that my dad had that stroke. And so I remember that during that time period, there were times where we'd be at the hospital and then she'd be out working on getting the hard science available to the governor, to the New York State House, to convince them that this was not a safe way of extracting gas. There is no safe way in our communities. And so what I guess to give her that credit, there was this injustice that we had to deal with as kind of like, an administrative paperwork thing that never should have spiraled into tens of thousands of dollars that we had to kind of figure out how to pay for. But I also saw her as a parent acting on this other sense of injustice that she saw posed a threat to, my dad, to my sister, to me. And so I think that having that kind of figure when you're that age really teaches you to see things for what they are and to kind of stand up for yourself. And now being a reporter, I'm not really one in the position to be making sort of activist critiques about the world. I think I see my role as to document and to find wrongdoings. But certainly that, that quest for finding justice and holding unaccountable systems to account is something that I definitely have to give my mom credit for that. Definitely at that point, it was seeing someone who was able to channel negative experience into one of growth and strength was something that I think, especially young people really need to see that in their kind of role models.
Yeah, what a powerful role model she has been in your life. Yeah. And when you also think about the reality that as a tween and then heading into your teen years again, how your experience of your father shifted and changed. And so there was some way in which you coped with that and you made sense of what was happening within his experience and your experience of him. How did that shape in your life? How did that happen?
Well, I would say that my mom and my dad have always kind of played different roles in my life. They both mean something different, and they've both kind of provided parenthood to me in kind of these different ways. And I think that that's really what, in my view, parents should be, is each one plays a particular role in helping guide you to, be able to make decisions on your own. And with my dad, one of the big things that him and I connected on was movies, actually. After his strokes, it became just that kind of shared enjoyment over an art form was something that really brought him and I together. And he was an art teacher. He's now retired, but he kind of had this creative side to him where he was always playing guitar or piano or that kind of thing. And having that around is still something that I still love playing guitar. I'm not that great at it, but I still like doing it. And having that sort of presence, even in when he was going through that awful time, he never really let it ruin him. I never saw his behavior change in such a way where he never lashed out. He never he handled that experience probably the best you possibly could ask for. There's tons of people who have strokes who go through like really horrible periods of like post-stroke depression, or they lash out at their family members, or they just change in their personality changes in some kind of fundamental way. And my dad has always been changed by it, but never in such a way that was, bad for me or my sister. And so he's still been a really good parent to me in that kind of way.
Yeah, so he was able to still share with you sort of the essence of who he is.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's so much pressure on parents, especially in this culture, to be perfect, to do, to meet a certain criteria.
Right.
You do this, then you do this, and you do this, and then your children will grow up and be successful, whatever the version of successful is at that moment in history.
Right.
And what I know as a psychologist, and it sounds like what you experienced, is that what children need is actually that connection. And he offered you that, and he was able to continue offering that. And in the moments maybe where you needed more of your mom, she was the one who was able to be there and lean in, even though she had so many things happening in her world too. And I think that's really powerful, that just being with human beings, having a shared experience, just having that bit of connection really does. I mean, there's a reason we want people connecting with each other as part of their mental health.
Right. Yeah. And I see my role kind of as a reporter in that way a lot. I think that journalists, there's not enough of us. We need more reporters out there. But I think that when there is some kind of failure to, for example, if someone were to go through a similar experience where they get sunk into hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical debt, there needs to be someone somewhere in the room saying that that's wrong, because it is. It's just unspeakable to think that to have an experience that you can't control would just totally ruin your life like that. And I think that reporters can be not just go stick it to the people who caused that, and they definitely should, but I think the more important thing is to be there during that experience that someone's having. And that takes time, and it takes a lot of trust building, but the most powerful experiences I've had as a journalist have been when I spend the time to really connect with someone going through an experience like that. And even though I might not be part of their family or part of their community, or I might look different from them, it still creates a kind of common human ground that I think that's where stories can really be told in a way where we don't just kind of cast stones at each other, but we kind of grow a larger understanding about who we are and kind of human nature in general. Yeah,
and so that deep human connection is sounds like part of what drives you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
In the moments where you felt, I work a lot with kids that age, the age you were when that happened to your dad. And, I think we're painting the narrative. We're showing that, look, here you are on the other side of it in a million ways, and doing well and thriving in the world. And I spend a lot of my time behind a closed door in a private space, talking with kids and working with kids around the things that happen to them, the things that happen to their families. And if you feel comfortable sharing it, it would probably be helpful for some of those kids to hear, like, what were some of the darker moments like for you? How, when there wasn't anybody available, even though you have these beautiful connections in your life, when there wasn't anybody available, how did you get through that? Or
Yeah, well, I think I was fortunate to always be like, I think pretty resilient when I was a kid. I was, I've had experiences like that when I was younger where I just kind of like, maybe there was that kind of like initial shock or sadness or it was disruptive or something like that. But I kind of bounced back from it pretty quickly, which, I guess maybe the lesson there is just don't overthink things. Is, like I think, often children can fall into the trap, and I think adults do this probably even more, of just trying to find too much meaning in things. I know that as I kind of grew older, trying to look for meaning in things that should just be kind of like left off to the side is not a good way to sort of approach things. For kids, I mean, I don't know, I can't speak for all children, but when you go through an experience like that when you're a kid, it affects you for a long time. It's a foundational experience. And whether you are a young child experiencing it or you're later on in your life, I think the best thing you can do is just kind of like put it off to the side, like respectfully. And I guess that's the process of healing or grief.
So just kind of really unflinchingly accepting what is and moving forward.
Yeah. I mean, with a certain level of allowing yourself to experience what you need to experience in terms of, emotional growth and all that. But, the experiences I've had when I was younger, they always affect you for the rest of your life. You always remember them. But I think as you get older, it's probably more of a waste of your time to keep going back to them and picking them apart, because I've definitely spent too much of my own time doing that, and it's not worth it.
Oh, okay. All right. I was just going to say, how do you know that? Yeah. And you're sitting across from someone who as a child was an exceptional overthinker, which is probably why I went in the professional direction that I went in.
Right.
And so I think to me, it also speaks to the reality that we all come into this world kind of wired in certain ways. Our temperaments are different, and certain temperaments do lend themselves to increased mental suffering.
Right.
And some, lead to being able to grab onto some resiliency a little more quickly and easily. And then the reality of the home we are in and the resources available to us, that really shapes the experience as well. So there's so many factors that are, we're talking about some of the things that were in your parents' control. They knew they could parent you in a specific way. They could, do things to help, help shape you. And then there are the things that happen that are outside of people's control. I can, knowing situations where, maybe somebody wasn't able to then gather together the resources to pay the medical bills eventually and all that. And I think that's what you're seeing in your work is that there are situations where it doesn't matter how resilient someone is emotionally.
Exactly.
There are these big things happening that would take any of us down.
And I think especially with, conversations happening these days about healthcare, especially, mental health care is something where there's just kind of a growing understanding now that that's something that we need to have our mental health care taken over. Not only just for your own well-being, but for the people around you. Our communities and our circles are always better off when everyone is taken care of in whatever way they need to be. And in my experience reporting, what I've kind of found is that there's such a huge disconnect between the lived experiences that people have in communities, especially smaller communities. Since I spent 2 years in South Carolina as a reporter in a very small community there, and the gap between what a community needs and what they're actually getting, especially in terms of mental health care. It affects everybody, but it affects children the most always. And so, that's kind of what I see, journalism as a way to kind of like highlight that gap between what people need to be full, complete human beings with their own kind of pursuit of what's best for them and the people around them, and what we're actually getting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the, while there's a mental health crisis for children, one of the groups we're most concerned about right now is young men in your age group, the mental health of the young men in your age group. And and part of the developmental task of exactly, of being in the 20s is finding a sense of purpose.
Right.
And that is a struggle. That is a really big struggle for folks. And I'm curious to hear. So now that you are in the role you're in, where you're doing the reporting that you do, and you're seeing all the time beautiful things, horrible things, unjust things, triumphs. You're seeing a whole lot of different slices of the human experience. Where do you find a sense of purpose, and where do you maybe hope to find more?
That's a good question. Well, it's always kind of like changed for me, especially since college. I went to college. I started college. I was like the pandemic year for my freshman year of college. So it was like end of 2019 was my first semester of college, and then there was like 2 months of a second semester, and then COVID happened. And so in a way, that time where I was like taking college courses online, which was obviously terrible, but I had all this time, and I really was able to spend it chasing my interests. And I think that, between the ages of like 18 to like 22, you have this time period where you really should be exploring the things that you like to do and the things that bring you closer to the people around you. And I think that in my experience, there's been so many things I've done where it's just like, film was one where it was like, I really thought that was going to be the thing that I was going to do for my whole life. And then it just didn't turn out to be that. And once I realized that, like letting go of that as soon as possible and just going on to the next thing, was really what has kind of led me to live a purposeful life. I'm still working on it. At 23, I feel like I don't have all of my cards in the right order.
That's yet. Exactly where you're supposed to be. That's good.
Yeah. So more to come. Maybe I'll come back on the show in a few years.
Absolutely.
And have more to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And, part of the developmental task, like you said, is to try things on. Right. And it's beautiful when we have the privilege and the luxury to be able to do that. And that's ideally what we hope for that 18 to 25 age range. You know, we call it emerging adulthood because it's a major transition in life. Huge developmental tasks are required of that period of time to navigate it successfully. And it's most easily navigated when you have the opportunity to try something on and realize I'm going to pivot. This isn't quite what I'm looking for. So something to just ponder for a moment here, separate from your work, because our culture is very steeped in work is purpose. It's our puritanical roots. It's annoying. So separate from work. And I'm not diminishing the work you're doing. Work it can be full. I mean, my own work feels to me such a sense. It feels like a calling and a sense of purpose and meaning.
Likewise.
But when we recognize that in any given moment, something could happen to us where our work is no longer something we can access. Where else do you imagine deriving a sense of purpose and meaning if being a reporter was no longer on the table?
Well, I love reading. Reading has always been something that has meant quite a bit to me. I think that's kind of common in journalism, especially, print journalists, and, journalists who do writing a lot. And so, reading, particularly reading with the kind of intention of discovering things about yourself that you didn't know. I think that there's maybe people don't understand that enough about reading. Is it's less about. I think there's a quote by. I don't want to misattribute this. I think it's by W.H. Auden, who he says that the best books, you don't read them, they read you. And I definitely feel that way about reading in general. That's kind of what I get out of it. And I think that, that carries on into so many of the other kind of relationships that you have with not just people around you, but just the world in general. You can view things from different perspectives and from new perspectives that kind of wash away maybe some of your own ignorance just towards the world around you, to people's other experiences, that kind of thing.
What's something that you've read that has kind of opened your eyes in a new way?
There's a book by the Chinese philosopher Lin Yutang that I'm reading it right now, and it's called The Importance of Living, and it was written in I think 1937, and it was right on the eve of World War II, and he wrote all about how he basically dissects all of the different ways that human beings kind of experience the world and why each one is kind of worth being present for. And he writes in a way that's kind of both, really deep and introspective, but also, he kind of backs up and puts a lot of humor into it. So it's both really deep and also not kind of irritable in the way that I think a lot of writers end up being when they try a little bit too hard. So that's one just off the top of my head. I'm reading it right now. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So reading gives you a sense of, it sounds like it connects you to experience, connects you to humans, gives you that sense of purpose. Where else do you feel most like yourself and most aligned with sort of who you are in this world?
That's a good question. And I mean, I would say that one thing I really struggled with outside of college, because I moved all the way across the country, was finding people who were like me a lot. When I was in the South, it's just totally different from the Northeast. It really is, especially the rural South. And so I didn't really have the kind of friendships and circles that I had in college that were really tight knit, and I spent all sorts of time around all these great people who I knew. And it took me a while to kind of get that back. There was a long period where I didn't have that. And, that was a sacrifice I made to kind of get my life started. But now being here in Keene, there's a lot more young people. It's not, it's not a big city, but there's a lot more people my age, people of my kind of sort of perspective on the world. Being here, I moved here in November. And so being here with that kind of level of connection outside of the other reason I'm here, which is work, has been, definitely something that was reassuring when I moved here and found that again really quickly, because it was something I thought was kind of just contained to college and then you lose it. I don't think you have to.
No, definitely no. And it's one of the most important things for your mental health moving forward.
Yeah,
and it sounds like it was one of the threads weaving through your entire life is that there has been connection present.
Yes.
So to get you through those experiences growing up and then through the college years and so on. Yeah. Connection is the relational world. We are relational creatures. I sometimes say to folks I work with and people in my own life, we are a pack animal. We are not meant to be in isolation. We really are. Yeah. We thrive best, even those of us who are introverts and maybe don't like quite as much of the social interaction, need to recharge independently. We still, humans need connection.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things in this world that I imagine you're encountering is the pandemic of loneliness. It gets talked about all over the place. I imagine you're seeing a little bit of that in your work.
Right. Yeah. I think I think it's not just physical isolation, but I think, people just feel in my experience, there just seems to be, ever since the pandemic, kind of just a general distance that people have from each other. It's harder to get closer to people. And I think a lot of people are just kind of experiencing, like, even though our communities have the same number of people, things may feel a little bit empty these days. And I think social media is to blame for a lot of that. We kind of don't know how to interact with each other anymore in kind of this way that's a little bit more organic. And so that's something that I think is a little bit harder to sort of document, because even the most stable people can notice something like that and not really bring it up. But the world has definitely changed in the past 5 years. Aside from all the other stuff, the pandemic really definitely, getting separated from everyone and then trying to come back into one community from that doesn't like come back all the way together without some kind of distance between everyone, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we saw that quite a bit in our work, and we were tracking for a long time this reality of humans beginning to be quite disconnected for each other. And so from my experience, the pandemic was gasoline on a fire that had already started.
Right. Yeah.
And it was a seismic event in our culture to have that happen. And so I'm curious to see ways in which, as humans, we figure out how to communicate with each other despite differences. We're watching families really struggle right now with, disconnection because of, strong ideologies being quite different. And we need to, as humans, figure out some way to be connected with each other, because our mental health survival depends on it. And we have to figure out ways to bridge these gaps.
Right.
I'm watching a lot of suffering happen at the moment.
Imagine with working with children so much. Well, I mean, I think that one thing I've encountered is that, we live in a world that seems to just kind of always want us to be angry. Anger is something it's really easy to kind of appeal to people's anger and people's fear. And I think that to give a kind of criticism to media and journalism, I think it's very easy for us to appeal to that and focus on that, and kind of write headlines in that way. And I mean, I myself definitely can't say that I haven't done that before to communicate urgency, but I think fear, anger, paranoia are all things that people have really. I mean, you can just experience it, yourself. It's kind of boiled to the surface in the past few years among our communities, and it's just not sustainable. I really don't think that we can be angry at each other for this long. And expect to continue to live in a stable world. And so I think part of our responsibility maybe as adults is to kind of claw some of that back and have conversations eye to eye with people, like literally in person, and rebuild kind of some of what was lost.
Yeah. So the two of us could sit here for hours meandering around and but I think for me, what's happening in the moment is it does feel really, really kind of beautiful to just be with another human being and just to chat and to connect and to take the time and to do that, that it's good for my mental health. It's good for your mental health. I'm glad we're able to share this conversation with folks.
Yeah, likewise.
So part of what we do at the end of each episode is we have the segment we call Trail Mix, where we give we give everybody a little something to take with them on the road. And I had prepped a quote, and now it feels completely irrelevant.
Oh, let's hear it.
It's really good, but I'm going to table this one, and it'll show up on a future episode for something else, because where we meandered, my mind just keeps going back to the concepts of connection and disconnection and how that impacts our mental health. Finding a sense of purpose and meaning and how that connects to our mental health. And then my mind goes to remembering having a conversation with you about Kafka and you having,
Right,
and then I
right.
read the piece you wrote. If anybody hasn't
Oh, the
read that
checkup,
yet,
yeah,
the checkup
yeah,
that
yes.
you write, it's online so people can see that. And so I'm going to kind of put you on the spot and
Okay.
so that our listeners can hear what your remarkable brain can do, and no pressure. And see if there's something from all the beautiful reading that you have done. You know, you really are a person who digs into knowledge, digs into gathering information. So if you were to offer to our listeners something they could take with them today that kind of hits on this sense of like we have a shared humanity, and that helps us.
Right.
What comes to mind?
There's an Ernest Hemingway quote. Ernest Hemingway, he says, "The world is a beautiful place and worth fighting for."
That does it. That's
Is
good.
that
Yeah,
good?
no,
Yeah.
that's perfect.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you so
Sure.
much for being with us
Sure.
today.
Yeah. Thank you for
And
having me.
yeah, we really always are so grateful to folks who choose to share some of their actual life with the rest of us.
Yeah.
It's pretty beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today and listening in. Please take good care of yourself and each other. And wherever you are on your path, we are honored to walk alongside you.